Hello there! In today's video, let's learn how to integrate our iOS SDK with your app. You should start by creating a portal and adding a project in the Apptics console. You can refer to our how-to videos given in the description below. After registration, you need to download the Apptics config.plist file and move it to the root of your Xcode project. Once it's done, you can add it to all the targets. Now the next step is to install the iOS SDK. We are first covering the integration process for Swift, followed by Obj C. Specify pod Apptics Swift in your pod file to integrate Apptics in the Xcode project. Now add the pre-built script, which is mandatory as it is used by the SDK to send data to the Apptics server. In the build script, you can add or pass parameters like your config file path and app group identifier if you have enabled one for your app's target. Or you can also pass app optional parameters like upload symbols for configurations and log file path strings. So once you have passed the values, run pod install. Next, let's import Apptics library in your app delegate class. Then, to initialize the Apptics SDK, call Apptics.initialize with verbose in your app delegate class on app launch. The final SDK configuration for Swift will look like this. Now do a final check, and now let's build your project in Xcode. And there you go, you have successfully integrated the iOS SDK. Now, let's add Apptics SDK to your app extension target. Add the appropriate Apptics extension pod to your app extension target in the pod file and complete the pod install. Then, the next step is to import the required header in your extension code. To track events, you can use a method to define different parameters like the group name that is registered in the Apptics console, then the event name from the group in which you registered the event, and the app group that is shared between your app extension and the main app. While configuring event tracking, make sure that a dedicated app group is created and shared between your main app and the app extension. Also, remember to pass the app group name via run script during the build phase of your main app for prompt event data transfer. Now, let's complete the integration steps for Obj C. After registration, you need to download the Apptics config.plist file and move it to the root of your Xcode project. Once it's done, you can add it to all the targets. Specify pod Apptics SDK in your pod file to integrate Apptics into the Xcode project. Now, add the pre-built script, which is mandatory as it is used by the SDK to send data to the Apptics server. In the build script, you can add or pass parameters like your config file path and app group identifier if you have enabled one for your app's target. Or you can also pass optional parameters like your upload symbols for configurations and log file path strings. So once you have passed the values, run pod install. Now import Apptics library in your app delegate class. Then, to initialize the Apptics SDK, you need to call Apptics.initialize with verbose in your app delegate class on app launch. The final SDK configuration for Obj C will look like this. Now, all you need to do is do a final check and build your project in Xcode. And there you go, you have integrated the iOS SDK successfully. Now in the next segment, we are going to see the integration steps for iOS SDK for multiple projects. Download the Apptics config.plist file for each project from your Apptics console. Keep each config file in a separate directory and provide them with unique names to avoid confusion. Include each config file in the relevant Xcode targets associated with the corresponding project. Then, modify the pre-built scripts for uploading DSIMs or other tasks and pass the specific config file path based on the target. Follow the same process for multiple targets in the same project or for different configurations too. and then we'll cover the different tracking states that we have in Apptics. While initializing Apptics, use the Apptics config class to configure the tracking state and data tracking preferences in Apptics SDK. Apptics offers different data tracking states such as with identity, anonymously, and do not track. Track on by default is the default tracking state until you set the user consent. Once the user consent is set, the tracking behavior configured in the SDK will decide the tracking state. We have completed iOS SDK integration step by step in this video. Hope you found it useful. Thank you.